Among the 6, 7 companies that we monitor the office presence in, the one
Okay.
with the highest office presence is the one not having mandatory office presence. I have been interviewing people and we have been serving people where they write that they really appreciate the trust that they receive to be able to work from home, and they feel that they need, if they have a break during the day, they have to compensate it by sitting a little bit longer hours in the evening. So people really have very high accountability with the
Mm,
mass use of technology and AI as well.
mm,
One of the missing links will be social interaction. So people who are good at social relationship building relationships will be with advantage over those who are only good with
mm.
technology.
Hello.
Hello,
Welcome on the Happy Developer podcast.
thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. So let's jump into the conversation. Um, so maybe you can just briefly introduce yourself to the listeners. Who is Darya?
Yes, so my name is Darja Šmite, and I'm a professor in software engineering at Blekinge Institute of Technology in Sweden. I also have a dual position. I have 20% position in SINTEF, a research institute in Trondheim in Norway.
Okay. Okay, interesting. So, and you're also a software engineer, right? Based on your
I
background.
used to be. I nowadays I can't really claim that I'm a software engineer. What I say is I used to be a software engineer in my previous life.
Oh, really?
This industry experience is so outdated. It's more than 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I'm proud to have those roots in industry
Mm,
because you look at life, especially when you're in academia, with
mm,
different eyes.
okay. I'm curious about the very beginning. So bring me back to those times, to the 80s and 90s, to the younger version of Daria, who's still looking very young, but maybe a little bit younger at that time. So, yeah, what happened that you decided to go into this field? What was the context? What were the triggers? Maybe you can bring us back.
That's an interesting question. All right. If you would ask Daria in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, would she be a professor? Or if you would ask her teachers or parents, they would probably say no. It's quite a journey that took me here, where I am and who I am and what I am. I ironically didn't have any IT classes at school because I jumped over. We had this reform in education, and I jumped over the age when they introduced informatics. So the chances for me to becoming a software engineer were quite slim. But I was very good in math and physics, and I was excited to get a profession that would utilize those skills and yet not be a teacher or not be an economist. A lot of young people at my age, when I was selecting the study program in the university, went either into law or into management and economics. And I decided to be different, not to be in a pool of students that seek after their education job, which would be hard given the number of students that finish graduate. I decided to search for a profession that would be interesting, suit me in capabilities, but be modern and wanted in the market. That's how I ended up selecting computer science in the Faculty of Physics and Mathematics at the University of Latvia.
Okay, okay. And at the time, so when you enrolled in the university, uh, was your country already free, or was it still in Soviet Union?
No,
I'm
no,
I'm
it
not
was free. It was
already free.
independent Latvia. It was 1997, and we got
Okay.
independence in 1991.
Yes, I think that's an important fact because you know I'm from Lithuania, you're from Latvia. We share, I think, a lot in common as countries and as people. And yeah, I'm just wondering about the climate at the time. So it's like a early post-Soviet period. Computers. I mean, I didn't have a computer at the time, and very little people had in my yard. So I got my computer, first computer in 2004. So I'm just wondering, what was the climate technologically, industry wise? I mean, what did you even knew about this field? I'm just curious.
Yes, that's another good question. I was probably very lucky because I come from a creative family. My
Mm.
parents are designers, and my
Oh.
mom, she in early 90s jumped on a train to Moscow to teach herself computer skills. That was unthought at that time. It was very, very new. And as you say, you're completely right to say that very few people had computers. My mom had a second Apple computer in Latvia, and she was from start really into Mac and Apple products. So we had when I was maybe 12 or 13, that was the time when we got our first computer in the family. She worked from home. It's
Oh.
also unthinkable at those times. So I
Uh,
come from a very strange family, as you
And
see.
just to stop you, Daria, here, we will, of course, talk about it, but one of your research topics is remote hybrid work. So that's kind
Yes,
of a funny
exactly.
coincidence, right?
Exactly. So I had very early examples of parents who used to work from home. And later they also had in independent Latvia, they established their own company, and the address of that company was also at home. So I had a first-hand experience with working remotely or
Mm,
remotely. You can't. It's a definitional issue and
mm,
vocabulary. um, Remotely means that you're remote to something,
mm-hmm,
but working from home, maybe in this case, is a more accurate description. So I had a computer that I could play with sometimes. I wasn't into games.
mm.
I was more into drawing or trying to understand what can a computer do. And then during my early years in the university, I went in parallel to study to fill the gap that others didn't have with this lack of informatics at school. And I went to um, programming classes for kids and graduated 7 semesters in 2 years or something, very fast.
So, how did you like coding at the time?
I was actually very excited. Um, I like to see that a human being can create something, and programming skills give you a possibility to create something that didn't exist, that runs or moves or flashes. At the time, we were using quite basic programming languages like Pascal, which could yeah, it's something unimaginary now. Everybody forgot about that. But you could draw something, you could use colors, you could use some forms. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
we also a- attempted to learn Pascal at school in my informatics classes.
Mm.
By the way, for those who don't know, informatics, it's a strange term we use in our countries. It's like kind of computer science in a way, right?
Yes, but you would be surprised in the many European
Yeah,
countries,
maybe
informatics is the term to use
that's true.
in relation to IT.
But in the States, I think they are not
No,
very
I don't think
familiar with the term. Yeah.
you're
Okay.
right.
And I'm jealous actually because, for example, right now in Lithuania, children learn, for example, Python, and it's a much more, I think, user-friendly language. But Pascal, I mean, I don't remember anything. I think I was so traumatized by the experience as someone who is like a humanities person, history,
Mhm.
languages. So, yeah, I hated it. But I also have a feeling that it was, I mean, you had to have quite a lot of intelligence, and it was not the most user-friendly experience for the beginner, I think.
Yes, I think in our university class also there were people who dropped out because they simply didn't really enjoy it. Um, it's definitely not a profession for everyone. But at the same time, software engineering, in principle, the variety of skills and job roles, descriptions, tasks that exist in the process of developing software is so broad that nowadays you don't really need necessarily to code or to love to code to be a part of the team.
That's true. And what did your parents, designer parents, think about your choice of studies?
They were very excited, I think. I think they it's a little bit a longer story because
Mm,
I come from a family for with deeper roots in creative professions. My grandparents, my mom's parents, both were actors, uh, and they did everything for my mom not to become an actor, and my mom did everything, I think, so that I don't become a designer, because that's a tough. Creative jobs are tough. You are very dependent on chances to get a job.
and by the way, what did she design? What type of design your parents
She was
do?
graphic designer, so she worked um, um, for a state in Soviet Union. It
Mm,
was a state governed agency that took over decoration of public places. So she would be the one behind Christmas decorations or
okay.
midsummer decorations
Mm,
in the entire town in Riga.
mm,
So it was quite cool. And then
okay.
later on, when she moved into computer graphics, then it was logotypes and company corporate styles from A until Z, with
Mm,
both the graphic and the implementation in the physical spaces, with renovations and furnishing and so on, interior designs.
okay. Yeah, so you're kind of broke the legacy because uh, grandfather, right? You said actor, or grandparents,
Both of them, yes.
both actors, then your parents designers, and now you suddenly start working with ones and zeros, right?
Yes, indeed. But I think I have managed to find ways for my genes
Mm,
also to make use of them, because look, as a teacher, you stand in front of the audience, right? As a researcher, I go to conferences. Again, I have to speak and to make a message heard and understood. So I think those actor genes from one
mm,
side play a very crucial role. And on the other side, to present information, both in writing in the articles and also in presentations. I present quite a lot for industry partners we work with. There, my parents' designer genes come into play and help me to structure the information and also present it visually uh, in a pleasant and comprehensive way.
mm. No, I cannot but think about the word you said, genes. because we can use it metaphorically. You
Mm.
know, like, okay, there's some predisposition that we inherited, but I think there's very interesting speculative discussions about whether actually you can inherit these things. Of course, you don't inherit probably the exact preference for the profession, but maybe temperament, maybe various forms of intelligence, and then probably probability theory works its way, and you might end up in a similar path. What's your take on this idea of inheriting predispositions, preferences from our family members?
I think inheritance is like 10% in this.
Hmm.
When I look back, whenever I would draw something on a piece of paper and present it to my mother, she would start criticizing or giving me feedback about composition, whether it was nicely composed or not. Again, when I was writing essays in school, she would also give me feedback about structuring the
Hmm.
information and presenting visually. Also, I was always taught that things you give to someone need to look nice,
Hmm.
look neat. Sloppy attitude was not something welcome.
Hmm.
And I was always received constructive feedback that formed me as a person. And I think that that accounts for 90% of uh, what we become, more
Hmm.
than predisposition by birth.
Interesting. You also mentioned another thing about how your mother would give you feedback on composition or aesthetics, and because we have been working together for a while on some research papers, I noticed that we both are quite meticulous and attentive to detail.
Mhm.
And my mother was also quite, how to say, willing to work on my, for example, various essays or whatever she was qualified. So I guess that's another thing probably when our parents, uh, by giving us feedback, maybe by giving demanding feedback, uh, allow us to become maybe more organized, maybe more conscientious in a way.
Yes, I think it's years of training.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay. And did you enjoy that feedback? Because not all kids, especially teenagers, like when their parents start saying what they have to do or how they have to do it.
I think I looked up to her because she was really good. She was one
Mm,
of the best in Latvia.
wow.
And I knew that even though I might not like the feedback, it was well deserved.
Mm,
Uh, and I think this feature is I carry it. It's an attitude
mm,
towards critical feedback. You can say, "Oh, this is really harsh. I don't want to hear it," but you
mm,
can also swallow it and then think about it and then become a better person. The
mm,
only thing that I really was not very happy about when I was cooking, the feedback that I received. I used to say, sometimes for a change, you could lie to me and say that you liked the food that
yeah.
I made.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, being one of the best in Soviet Union as a designer, you probably imagine the pressure you have from everyone, and this pressure probably just it exudes, and you want to make sure that your kid probably also becomes the best in what they do. And I think there are situations when it's very helpful because well, then we become like results driven. We want to achieve that level of perfection as well. But our times, I guess, it can be too demanding because we take that voice to ourselves, and then that voice leads us in every activity we do in a way. So it's I can imagine sometimes it's very helpful and sometimes can be annoying in a way.
And it's a very different upbringing culture
Yeah.
in general, in comparison, for example, with Sweden today,
Mm.
where the purpose is to make your kids happy people. And in a country with a fierce competition, we
Mm,
want this happiness comes from being successful,
mm,
becoming someone, somebody, not
mm.
nobody. So I think our parents, in a way, were influenced by this. Yes, maybe amount of talented people as well, and
Mm,
this structure of the society
yeah,
that was not very flat, to be frank.
indeed. Oh, that's a very generous way to say it. I mean, there was no smell of flatness, I think. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your research interest and still maybe the roots of it, because the way I see it, human aspects of software engineering, at least that's the term I like to describe the psychological, social aspects of software engineering, computer science. I mean, it is also a relatively new field, historically speaking, or maybe I'm mistaken. And if I am, correct me. And also share, please, how did you learn about this and what was your early exposure to these ideas? And at what point did you decide that maybe it would be an interesting area of research for you?
Yes, so human factors, maybe it's not that new, but
Mm-hmm.
the roots maybe come earlier version of this field is human computer interaction, which is a
Okay.
little bit different.
Yeah. What is the
No,
difference, if you can describe it?
uh, yes, human computer interaction not necessarily is about software development, and human factors in software engineering are factors that help us to improve, for example, productivity or job satisfaction of people who are developing software. Um, and we also call it behavioral software engineering.
Yeah.
And I think the very interesting way to present the importance of human factors is to just account the number of programming languages. It's about 9,000 programming languages that have been invented to improve productivity. And yet, products, the project or software development endeavors are being late to deliver what the customer wants. And the biggest resource here of improvement are the people who develop software, how people work. I really like the topic of teamwork, how several people in as an ensemble work together. And I think it's a challenging field. Of course, I don't use much of my math passion for math here. I more learn to interview people, to interpret what they say, and to construct the theory from observation or from inquiry. But I think it's very rewarding because by being a researcher, you step out, you're outside of the environment. And in industry, people are driven by deadlines, by their own tasks, by the tempo in industry is very, very fast, and they don't have time to reflect that much. And researchers have the resource and the skills to help these reflections,
Mm.
and also to make suggestions that might come from other companies or from even other countries if they are published in research articles that we read. And I think this knowledge dissemination, knowledge sharing, and facilitation of creation of new knowledge is quite an interesting activity and job profile.
And before we get into more detail about the human technology interaction, human aspects of software engineering, what was like the trigger that made you uh, go into this field, become a researcher? Maybe you can tell a little story. What was the beginning of this?
Yes. So I was working in industry before I started my academic career. I was, admittedly, I was with one foot in university already during my studies because I was helping out as an assistant, teaching assistant. And then I was offered an opportunity to study to go forward to do a PhD, and in fact, in an industrial PhD for a company inside the company. I would spend half time working and half time doing my PhD, and it was a difficult choice. I I was quite sure that I want to become a consultant of one of the big five consultancy companies back then in Riga. And that was the ceiling that I could see for myself in general in the profession. And curiosity killed the cat. I did not know what I could do with a PhD. And it was like climbing the mountain and not being able to foresee what you will be able to see from up there.
Interesting.
Uh, and I was more afraid to lose this opportunity and regret not doing something with unclear outcome rather
Mm.
than following the path with very clear outcome.
Mm.
And I spent 1 year searching for the topic and while working in this research institute. And back then, so it's early 2000, it was quite modern for Latvian companies to work for German customers, Swedish customers also. And there were a lot of challenges for Latvian developers to collaborate and to also bridge this distance gap in how outsourcing relationship worked. And I was tasked to research this and help the company. And that's what
Mm.
where my interest in distributed development started. And through the years, I was very loyal and dedicated to this topic. And I worked with distributed teamwork. I worked with outsourcing costs and benefits, with various, really various topics inside that. One, during my PhD, one of the most interesting topics was trust. How do you establish trust if you don't meet? Trust
Mm.
needs touch, we say. But how do you establish trust when people work on a distance, when you don't have transparency into daily activities of engineers that sit somewhere far away? And this was probably the first human aspect that I looked at. And it was quite interesting also to read sociology and social science theories and try to apply them to explain what we see when we observe software products and software engineers at
Mm.
work.
Mm. Very interesting. Hmm. You know, I cannot but think about also the climate in the early 2000s or whatever. And I now I cannot remember, but were there any like proper synchronous communication tools like video conferencing?
Not
Was Skype
really.
already in the business or?
Not really. And
Yeah.
to further complicate everything, the internet connection bandwidth was very poor.
Yes.
So we had, for example, one of the tasks that I had was to investigate the communication between Riga team and Rezekne team. Rezekne is a smaller town in Latvia next to
Mm.
Russian border. And the project manager from Riga was very confused and um, stressed about this team that he had in Rezekne. And I drove there to see how people work. And the project manager complained that he didn't receive responses to his emails. He would
Yeah.
write an email and they would not respond in for 2 hours. And the fact was that they had to disconnect certain applications on their computers to be able to upload the code.
Mm.
And sometimes they had to go outside to have a coffee while this process of uploading the code was happening. So that is the atmosphere of early 2000s.
Yeah, I remember that's maybe a little bit irrelevant story, but um, when we had like the first internet, it was like, I don't remember, it was like maybe 2006, 7, something like that, you know. And at the time, I was playing Counter Strike. I'm not sure if you know this computer game. A lot of boys were into it. It's like a shooter, you know, where you can play against each other. Some are terrorists, others are counter terrorists, blah blah. And at the time there were many people were like creating videos based on the best episodes in various professional games, and then you would like people would edit them, put some nice music, and then you would like appreciate the art of the game by seeing those we would say frag movies, frag like a good shooting in the game, let's say
Mhm.
when you kill a lot of enemies like in a spray. And I would download those movies, but at the time we would have a cap of how much megabytes per month you can basically use, otherwise you would have to pay additional fees.
Yes.
And I remember when I was downloading those movies and I maybe wasn't aware whether I reached the cap or not, and my father was angry that I went over the
Consumed
cap
all the
and
internet.
used too much of the internet. Yeah, so that was a strange time when you think about it.
Yes, I think the tooling has developed so much that remote work uh, and building relationships, work relationships, have become much, much easier. And yet there is some magic in in-person interaction. And this is something that I'm occupied with nowadays with the increased remote working.
Hmm. Okay, so maybe we can talk about some of your interests. Um, I guess I think that the best way to go about it is would be maybe if you allow me just I have certain questions, maybe certain problems, and I guess I would like to pick your brain on it, and maybe if you can refer to any specific research that you did or you did with your colleagues, that would be amazing. I will put the links in the description for people to read. And I think it will be much more interesting than just going through separate studies.
Mhm.
What do you think?
Sure, of
Yeah,
course.
so I guess, of course, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is now the trend to force people go into the offices. So I'm sure that it's not only in the States, it's not only in Lithuania, it's probably in many other countries,
Yes,
right?
of course. And also in Sweden and in Norway,
Mm,
managers are thinking about that. And it's a little bit a fortunate for employees situation here because in Scandinavia, the attitude uh, towards employees is based on trust. It's a relationship of trust and autonomy because people have a very high level of accountability. So um, I have been interviewing people and we have been serving people where they write that they really appreciate the trust that they receive to be able to work from home. And they feel that they need, if they have a break during the day, they have to compensate it by sitting a little bit longer hours in the evening. So people really have very high accountability. And yet, some companies are thinking for the sake of the employees. It's not about being tayloristic managers and forcing everyone, like in some countries, back.
Maybe you can clarify Tayloristic. I know what you mean by Taylor, but maybe listeners don't know who was Taylor.
Yes, it's a term that we use to describe the power relationship between the management and the employees, where the it's about setting the rules and keeping the chain of command, and employees obeying the rules set by the management.
Yeah, if you allow me, I guess to add a little bit of detail, if I remember correctly, it was like one of the first most popular managerial scholars. I don't remember his first name. I would have to Google, but he basically set up that the basic trends for how productive work should happen in a factory, for example.
Yes,
And I
industrial
think
revolution times.
yeah, exactly. And I think we still have the ghost of Taylor somewhere swirling in those discussions because, yeah, I'm not sure, as you said, about the trust. Sometimes it feels that some companies don't trust their engineers.
And I would disagree with this.
Okay.
I think that managers, we have this ghost of Taylor over us somewhere, and I think our fears drive us to misinterpret the advice that managers give to the people sometimes in companies. So I think that what managers see is that the increased isolation and individualization at work um, so causes us to break the culture of teamwork and mutual help and backup behavior when we shift the workload from more busy people to less busy people in the work unit. And this happened very naturally when we observe each other at work. When we work increasingly remotely, we are like separate cells. There is very little transparency. And I think we're losing quite a lot of these collectivistic behaviors that help us to be more than a sum of individuals. Teamwork adds a little bit more. If let's give an example. If I'm a senior engineer and I know what I'm doing, of course I'm very productive working from home. But if I have colleagues who are new to the job, my presence in the office and helping hand can actually make them learn faster. It will be on the expense of my individual productivity, but together as a unit, we will be faster, more productive.
Okay, so I think here it's important, I guess, to talk about details because, the devil lies in the details. And I think when you're looking from the high tower, from the sea level tower, it may definitely seem like you said that, okay, if people don't interact face to face, you will lose the opportunity to have more rich communication between each other. So, if let's say two people are together and they have an opportunity to talk to each other as opposed to they are separate, of course it makes sense to have them together. Let's say if let's say you are wanting people to go to a meeting room and brainstorm new ideas, new ways how to improve something, when you're next to each other, it is likely that the social circumstance will trigger maybe to do that as opposed to when you are, let's say, distributed. And I know examples where companies would have this culture way before COVID happened.
Mm.
There was even, yeah, so for example, a company that I worked with when I was an IT recruiter, they were very strict about the fact that you have to be in the office. The good thing is that they were also one of those ambassadors of very strong benefit systems where people would get every day free lunch. So it was like already how many years ago? It was like already 10 years ago they had this. They would have, for example, a lot of possibilities to travel on companies' expenses to the headquarters that were in Tel Aviv. So they would have an opportunity to spend time with people from other countries that would be funded by the company. It would be like for 2 weeks, maybe a month, and it can be a regular thing for engineers. So I understand this, but maybe if you allow me to be that, how to say, step into the frustrated engineer who doesn't like this trend, right? I will try to be empathetic towards them, and maybe you will help me. Uh, maybe you will help uh, prove others, frustrated engineers, why maybe they are wrong, or maybe they are misinformed. Maybe there is a reason to think that it's good what we are witnessing. Okay. So, of course, it will be an anecdote, but I'm sure that there are many of those anecdotes in many companies. So, one anecdote: an engineer is forced to come to the office because every engineer is forced to come to the office. But the company has many locations where people work from. And it's a distributed situation where you don't have your team in the same room. People are in different cities, basically. And the person, because it's a company policy, they have to attend office at least maybe 4 times a week, right? But the interesting thing is that there's no one in the office.
Mhm.
He's basically alone, and he's kind of asking me, so with whom I have to talk to HR, administration, or whatever, and he's honestly asking this, and he's a little bit confused, and he has a kid, and raising a small child, you know what it means. Flexibility is important. So that's like one of the situations where people are confused, what benefit do they get by spending alone in the office. Maybe you have any thoughts on this example of the problem or
I
the
have a lot of thoughts about that, and I
okay.
think that we missed this in the beginning to clarify what's important here. And of course, office presence is not important. I can give you another example when companies, in the face of half empty offices, just downsize the number of desks. And then in certain peak days of presence, people may come to the office. They're forced to come several days a week. And they would come to the office for not even getting a desk or sitting with people they don't work with. So I
Yes.
think that I hear a lot of frustrations also from the engineers I talk to in companies we collaborate with. And the key here is that it's not the office presence we want, it's the co
Yes.
presence.
Mm-hmm.
And mandatory office presence or mandatory office days do not guarantee that.
Okay.
So, our advice based on the research we do is to not force people back, to explain what's important, and then to give a chance for teams and units to discuss and come to an agreement when and how much co-presence is important. Because in some I will give you another example. We live maybe in towns where commuting one way to work, for me it takes 17 minutes driving. It's not that much. But there are towns, for example, in India, where you have to drive 2 hours or take transport, 2 hours of commute one way to work and back. That's a huge investment from taking away from family time. So it doesn't make any sense to come very often to work if there are no colleagues at work or if you are more productive working from home. And in those cases, one of the solutions that I've heard being discussed, looking at a collocation of 1 week a month. You pick a week and then you're all together in the office. And that's more important than being certain number of days a week, um, random days a week, and optimizing towards that.
Yes, yes. I appreciate what you're saying, and I guess I take this from what you are discussing. One is the importance of autonomy and choice, So when you allow people to discuss among each other or discuss with their with themselves what is the best for them, for their families, for their team, right? People the feeling, the experience of the autonomy increases intrinsic motivation, and then you're more willing to go to the office. When you're willing, then you're more willing to engage in those conversations because it feels that it comes from you, not that it's like a outcome of some kind of coercion by a company policy in a way. So that makes sense, and I actually like what you're saying. I knew companies when I was working as an IT recruitment consultant also before COVID. They would work in a distributed setting, fully remote, but they would have like regular meetings, and they would every time pick a different city where the company is based. So sometimes they would meet in London, then they would meet in Vilnius, then they would meet maybe in Barcelona,
Mhm.
and company would fund this, and they would spend that week like learning something, doing something, discussing various issues. And I feel it even increases excitement when there's like an interesting opportunity to meet anyone as opposed to just spend time eh, among four walls in a way for the sake of spending time among four walls.
Yes, that's true. And
Okay.
ironically, among the six, seven companies that we monitor the office presence in, the one
Okay.
with the highest office presence is the one not having mandatory office presence.
So there's a correlation, right?
With one data point, yes.
One data point, true. Okay, what do you think if I will give you another anecdote and
Sure,
maybe it
sure.
will it will facilitate something? So there's another issue, another example. Uh, it's not like a mandatory situation. People decide when they can come to the office, and a person decides to come. It's an engineer as well, but the problem is that they do want to have this interaction. They do want to have this collaboration, even just basic things like going for a lunch. But every time the person would come to the office, when the lunchtime comes, let's say 12 o'clock, he just stands up and says to their team, "Would like anyone go for lunch?"
Mhm,
And everyone would stay silent. And he would do like every time for a while, and everyone usually would stay silent. And the funny thing is that it's just people were so introverted that they wouldn't appreciate this, although they would spend a lot of time
mhm,
in the office. So so that was not mandatory. People would go to the office. There was one person who would like to have more conversations, but most of the team wouldn't want to have this. And finally, the person was frustrated and left the company partially because of culture. So that's, I think, one of another anecdotes that frustrates people because it kind of gives an example of how even willing office presence, co-presence doesn't do. So what do you think about this? Any thoughts, any research based ideas,
mhm.
or your consulting based experience?
Very interesting. I have experienced myself corporate culture differences. The first company I worked for was an American company where the onboarding process, during the onboarding process, I was told that we say du to each other. Dutzen in German, it's a informal you. And whereas in Latvia it was common to say formal you,
We
sitzen.
had the same in Lithuanian.
Yes. So that was one. And then we greet each other. We say hi to each other, even if we don't know each other. So if you pass someone in the corridor, you would always wave or say hi. And then I switched to another company which was more hierarchical, more formal. And people would turn their heads when they pass each other to avoid saying hi. And I really disliked that. So I did feel good in that working culture. So I think working culture, it has nothing to do with introverts or extroverts. I have many introverted colleagues, and I know of engineers, many engineers who are introverted, who enjoy going for lunch together, because that's how they compensate the quota, the socialization quota that extroverts are so good at compensating outside of the work. So, work relationships between introverted people at work can be very active and friendly, close. But the work culture is very important. And I think one of the things that everyone needs to be aware of when you go to an interview, it's good to ask about the work culture. How are the work relationships? How are the relationships between management and subordinates or employees? Among the employees, are there any rituals? Are there any common practices? What's the daily, weekly rituals at work? And I also know from the other side that the recruitment processes sometimes work towards employing like minded people. Because it's, let's face the truth, working with um, a team of like minded people, at least from different you could pick up psychological tests better than me to have a good assembly of people to work together. It's much better than feeling that you are completely different than others. And I would also quit if I was in the shoes of
Yes.
that person.
Yes. And I guess based on what you're saying, what I hear is that yes, there is that tension between individual preferences and culture. And even if you would like to have informal conversations, would like to have to spend some time, if people basically don't like each other, so you will not force them to spend time together. And a good idea is maybe to think about the team dynamics when you are hiring people. At the same time, I understand recruiters because, of course, now it's a bit different. The uh, engineers are not in the, how to say, the higher negotiating position because there are less opportunities. But then where a lot of opportunities, I mean, people choose a job from six possible offers. So you rarely have this opportunity to be very picky unless you're a top-notch company like Google or whatever, and you don't have the privilege to decide whether, for example, this person will be a fit in the team. Another problem is that sometimes when companies hire people, only after they hire, they decide where to put that person. And maybe those hiring decisions after in the onboarding process are not based on the recruitment strategy. So you might think about the possibility, okay, maybe this person will be a fit in this team or that team, but then the managers come, no, we will take this resource. Yeah, that's the lingo sometimes.
Yes, and
Um,
treating people as resources is a very stupid thing to do. Let me put it.
yeah, but that's no, that's another problem, I guess. We, of course, we can talk about it, but what do you think about this aspect where you're kind of forced to take what you have and you don't have the privilege to choose, and you're basically end up with people that might not necessarily like each other, and even if you have office presence, even co-location, you don't necessarily get psychological presence, right? Psychological safety. So anything what research says, how could companies navigate such circumstances? Any thoughts from your side?
I think so. It's a task for a team lead. So team
Mm,
leaders nowadays are challenged to
mm,
create psychological safety in the team, for example, or
okay.
circumstances, so that everyone feels welcome, everyone feels able to speak up,
Yes.
and what you started these conversations with about this serendipitous encounters at work, or um, yes, we have a lot of tools. We have video conferences, we have Slack, we can ping each other. So certain serendipity or a spontaneity in communication, even if it's electronic, we can achieve, of course. But there is a completely different predisposition to communicate. You have to plan interactions, and if you don't know if a person is busy or not, if they are working or not, you might not reach out. So the communication is radically different. Maybe not radically, but in many cases, there are people who would not speak up when there is a digital meeting. It's very difficult to follow up on something others said if the code is that you need to raise your hand before speaking in a digital meeting. We don't do that in a room. We read the room, and we can talk over each other and still hear it. In a digital meeting, it's quite difficult. So a lot of communication flow changes when we move to video conferences or audio conferences, even worse. So I think it's a task for a team lead or a mediator to find a way to get everyone on board, and also distribute the uh, abilities to speak in a meeting.
Well, I think what you're discussing is another problem sometimes when people don't want to participate in meetings, they don't say anything, they stay silent, they don't share their opinions, they don't give their input. I think it can be even normal in healthy teams where just people, well, they don't want to, they will rather hear someone more experienced, maybe someone more
It's a
competent. So
culture. I,
of course
I
it's
don't think I would blame the culture of that team for that.
if let's say people are shy and they don't share,
It's
but
bad,
if
now it's bad mediation.
okay, yeah, because I still think, so what do you think about this, not necessarily speaking of meetings, but basically the fact that people, well, don't necessarily like each other. Let's put it this way. Okay, they can work together. Yes, they can exchange feedback, but they wouldn't see each other as possibly friends. And I'm struggling to understand what mediation, I mean, could change. I mean, if I come to the yard as a child and I don't see that I would like to play with these kids because they play games that I don't like, I will not play with them. So that's kind of the situation I'm trying to describe. And I don't, and it's usually, it's enforced by the people you have to hire. Maybe you're not the most sexy company. Maybe you don't have the highest salaries. Maybe you don't have the privilege to choose what comes to your team. I think that there's a lot of small companies who are swimming in this circumstance because they are not like the top, and they still somehow need to get job done. They still need to ensure that people collaborate and produce something other than just you know code. Maybe they innovate or whatever. So any ideas what to do for such maybe small, medium-sized companies who are not sexy, who are not very attractive, but they still need somehow to help their team members to tolerate each other at least.
I'm not a psychologist to
Yeah, sure, yeah, I
this
understand, but
situation, but I think that coaching teams to have professional relationships
mm,
still of giving feedback. You can monitor how people give each other feedback. You can monitor, you can set up norms,
mm,
behavioral norms, what behaviors we welcome in the team, what we don't welcome in the
yeah,
team, and establish rules for how to give feedback, how to collaborate, how to share information, how to appreciate each other, how to understand each other. So, for example, I have been giving cross cultural communication courses
Mm.
Indians and Swedes who,
Okay.
frankly speaking, see each other as lunatics sometimes in
Mm.
the behavior, work behavior.
Yeah.
We do have very different cultural values and what is accepted, what is not accepted.
Mm.
And also, not only at work, but we are also influenced by our environment. So, in this course, just acknowledging the differences was one step
Yes.
forward, and understanding the reasons why people behave in a different way. I can
Okay.
give you one example. Swedes were very concerned about Indians not coming to work, having a lot of days off. And apparently, um, one of the reasons for this was that they have to attend weddings, and then Swedish colleagues would ask, "How many weddings do you have a year?" And they would say, "Well, five, six, maybe more." And that is very different in Sweden.
Mm.
So Swedish colleagues would say, "I have attended maybe two in my entire life. How many people do you invite to weddings?" And then Indians would say 200, 300 people. And in Sweden, it would be maybe four people, maybe 10
Yeah.
people, maximum 20 people. So it's
Yeah, okay.
radically different. But
Mm.
these explanations give, provide an understanding that it is not um, opportunism behind one's action, but there is a good reason for that. And understanding the reason helps you tolerate the behaviors or understand better the person on a personal level.
You said that you're not a psychologist, but I think you described a very good psychological intervention, because when you were talking, I was thinking about maybe you have heard of it, Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication model. If you don't, I may share. It basically boils down to the idea that people behave violently towards each other, meaning they interrupt each other, they don't listen each other, they get into conflict, is because first they don't understand their own feelings and needs,
Mhm,
and they don't understand the feelings and needs of others.
mhm,
And the core idea of that model is to help people become aware of what they feel, become aware of what they need, and find a constructive way how to express their needs.
mhm,
Similarly, like understanding what others feel, what others need, and how invite others to express their own needs. So, and it's a lot about personal responsibility and a lot about compassion and curiosity. And I think if, let's say, you have a team that don't like each other, at least you can talk openly. What do you don't like about each other? And sometimes when you create this type of openness in a team, maybe with external help, people start liking each other more, because then knowing that, okay, don't like this about you, you don't like this about me, it can become a joke where you overcome this bridge, and then you can laugh about it, because, oh, again, Povilas is inviting to lunch, and it can, yeah, become funny, and increase the mood, in the team. So, yeah, I think that that could be something that could work. Just teaching our people to understand each other, even if these are not cultural differences, just personality differences or
I think the
preferential
first task
differences.
is to stop disliking each other. And then you can
Mm.
create shared experiences and start liking each other.
Yeah, but even if you don't want to like each other, at least you can appreciate what you don't like about each other
Hmm.
and be respectful that, okay, I don't like this about you, you don't like this about me, but we understand this and we can work around this, and that's fine.
Well,
You
that
don't have,
requires a sense of humor.
yeah,
You will
exactly,
create,
exactly.
without it, it's a very tough
True.
situation.
But software engineers are famous of having a quite good sense of humor. They like memes, so I think there's potential for that.
Yes, sarcasm type of humor maybe more than
True, true.
than other.
That's true. That's true. I was thinking also about another case. Would you like to get one more? And I think it will be a little bit counter to what we discussed. And it's a situation where I don't understand why it's not talked about more, So I also worked with one company when I was a recruiter. It was also before COVID, mid COVID, something like that. And they were also fully remote. At the time, it was the trend to go fully remote. Now it's to go fully office, but whatever. And it felt to me that it was quite working for them because they had these like travels that we already discussed. So that's like one thing that helped to bridge the lack of co-presence. But one of the teams I remember would have a very interesting way of working. They would connect to a meeting room, Zoom or whatever, Teams or whatever, and they would just code together,
Mhm.
but they wouldn't talk. But when someone wants to ask a question, they would just, hey guys, I would like to discuss something. And then others would also be able to hear that conversation. So they found a way how to replicate uh, some form of co presence, some form of safety by using synchronous digital tools, basically. And for them, it worked because they would talk to each other and they would discuss various questions. They would solve these problems. It wouldn't happen very often because people, they were quite, there was a good match between the team, and these would be like 3 4 engineers, so it's not like a huge group of people, but they would have this experience of presence, and that worked for them. And I'm wondering why companies sometimes don't look for creative ways how to replicate these psychological experiences in digital settings, which seems much more innovative than just going back 20 years to the past and okay, let's go to the old school way of working. You know what I mean? That's sometimes what confuses me. Maybe you have something to
I
share
think
about it.
I've seen this, I've practiced this myself, and I've seen
Okay.
this, especially during the pandemic, to be honest. This was a very nice way to compensate for the lack of social interaction. Just to have a window, a virtual window that you can enable or disable the sound, but you could see a co-presence of someone
Yes.
on a screen. I've seen it also for many years ago in outsourcing relationships which I was monitoring, to have one office with a camera and another office with a camera and the screens that have this window to the other office. But what it requires is synchronous work schedules,
Yeah,
and what we
that's
have
true.
now is flexible work schedules. It's not only the
Mm,
locational flexibility, but it's a temporal flexibility as well. So people want to wake up late, maybe, and some wake up early. Some have a walk during the day. Some have kids, play with kids for 2 hours, and then shift their work hours to different. Having a different schedule, and that's problematic. You can't really do that. So I don't think that the companies don't provide this opportunity. I think it's the teams that don't utilize the low hanging fruit that is available for everyone. I don't. I have not seen a company that wouldn't have a video conference facility. Would it be Teams, Zoom, or Meet, Google Meet, or any other platform? It's there. It's the teams that don't choose to use it. And at the same time, I know of engineers that would pair program every second week on
yeah.
a distance uh, for 4 hours a day, to exactly to have this ability. They would sometimes break something down and code in parallel, but then have this active window open to each other. But surprisingly, maybe not as many people and teams do that as I would expect.
Hmm. engineers don't do a lot of things on their own will. You sometimes have to invite them. That's what I noticed, at least working as a psychologist, that I mean, that's a population that you have to have patience with, and you don't have to expect a lot of extroverted behavior where you are loud, you are express your needs very openly, you share, and of course, when you create a safe environment, they will share more most of the time, even if they are introverted. But it takes time. But sometimes, I will give you an example. I'm offering right now a opportunity for companies to have group coaching for every week for about 2 to 3 months, and this is for people who maybe are on the verge of burnout or already burned out. And it's an experience where you bring, like, let's say 7 8 people together. I'm the facilitator, and my job is to help people talk about anything, talk about their work, talk about their mental health, talk about their families, whatever they want. I do that. I ensure that by ensuring what people come to the group. So there's a recruitment aspect of it to make sure that people understand what group coaching is. Are they open to share? Are they willing to share? Do they understand that there might be some tension in the group and it's okay? So I do that onboarding in those one on ones. And then you get those 7 8 people. You meet weekly, and it kind of becomes like a uh, group session, group supervision, whatever name you
Mm.
call it, where people can share about anything. And companies, people even don't realize that there can be such form of sharing and learning from each other's experience and growing. And if they are not aware, even if this tool is available, they will not ask for it because they don't know how it works, what's the use of it. So that's kind of the problem, where there are many tools, but people are just not properly informed and on board with how to use these benefits or tools. And then companies say, oh, but people don't use it. Oh, but have you tried explaining to people how it works? Have you allowed them to have a taste of it, at least in a demonstration or whatever? So that's, I guess, another problem why sometimes people don't use certain good tools or good psychological interventions, I guess. Well, what do you think about
Yes, I think it's a catch-22, because if managers wait for self coordination and self management on an employee level, then you need champions who would be willing to take initiatives, and you have to have a culture of recognizing initiatives of that sort. So I am a research interested in communities of practice, and that's about the ideal predisposition for them to flourish in a company is a kind of when top down facilitation meets also bottom up initiatives. You can't say now you have to have communities, you will be responsible for starting a community, and then you need to make it work. There needs to be this bottom up and top down forces that meet
it? Yes.
together. So in this case, I would say it's a lack of bottom up initiatives
Hmm.
and an expectation top down that it would just naturally happen if there was
Yes,
a
yes.
need. So both employees and managers need to work together to create a culture where there would be self organizing groups and informal structures in an organization that feel the needs that emerge.
Okay. Thank you, Daria. That was really useful. And I think we could go on with these situations, but I think there's still some other topics left that I would like to discuss with you. But still, speaking of research, um, what do you think, Daria, speaking of your research or what you observe right now in the human factors area of engineering or whatever, what are like the most important research knowledge that companies, for example, need to know or need to implement to improve their performance, improve their productivity, improve job satisfaction. And maybe there is something that companies are missing because they are relying on industry trends as opposed to what data says. They are relying maybe on insecurities as opposed to trust, for example. And I truly believe that despite those psychological forces impinging on various corporate decisions, I still feel that engineering companies are aware, how to say, that data can be used for their benefit, and they are not like, as sometimes the saying is, they are just biased, and data is used and abused, and it's not kind of a actual awareness tool in a way. It's just a way how to manipulate people and get your agenda going. So I want to believe that there is openness to data, there is willingness to use it ethically, there is some curiosity. So anything that companies in the tech sector in general need to know from the research, I just something that pops into your head from your research or other researchers in general.
It's a very broad question. And of course, it's if you're fishing for one magic silver bullet or several silver
Maybe at least
bullets,
free, free silver bullets.
uh, I don't think they exist. For example, I'm very fond of agile ways of working, and I think that in Scandinavia we have reached the state where all the rituals and practices are part of everyday life, and they actually help teams and engineers to work efficiently and effectively. Um, but I don't think this applies everywhere. So national cultures and work cultures are there for a reason, and what works here might not work somewhere else. So this is just a disclaimer. Then I think something that popped up in my head are the recent trends. First, we don't have a full understanding of what hybrid working is. So, understanding how to run a company with people being some being present and many not being present in the office is one of the tasks for today's and maybe tomorrow's nearest future management, and also for employees to decide whether they would prioritize their individual needs and the well-being, more like mental and physical well-being, or orient towards the teams and satisfy the social well-being. um, I think that is one big trend that we see
Mm,
in both research and practice, and yelling uh, answers, and a lot
mm,
of questions that need to be understood. Data does help with this, but for example, in some companies, I can't get access to individual office presence. So for me as a researcher, there is a need for data, but sometimes for wrong reasons, data is protected, so we can't really
mm.
learn from the data. And in other companies, the data is readily available for research.
And Daria,
Mhm.
what are those wrong reasons? Why data is not shared? Why data is not transparent sometimes?
I think that, honestly speaking, some companies don't want to learn something that is happening in a company. Uh, and from another side, I think that we do research anonymously. So when we get the data, it's all hashed in a way that we can't identify a person behind the data point. And yet, some companies prohibit individual data point analysis and make available only the aggregated data. But when the data is aggregated, I cannot really combine it with other data sources, and this invalidates the research methods that are used. Yes. Second trend,
Hmm.
generative AI is transforming the way we work. I see that many companies started firing certain professionals, and I think this is a second really big trend that we need to pay attention to and understand how to use it in ethical ways for our advantage.
So what type of competencies, let's not talk about professions, but competencies, skills. What type of competencies and skills in software engineering in general are being replaced right now by AI tools?
Definitely not creative jobs,
Hmm.
but it can speed up certain problem solving and even write decent code. The problem is that you need to validate the output that you receive, and this requires the competence and skills of the developer to
Yes.
understand that what the output they receive is in fact valid.
Yes, it's very similar actually to what I noticed like how many years ago? I'm getting old, Daria. 8 years ago. So I was working in a translation company and quite a big one who I like works with not like directly, but through another company with like Google, Siemens, and similar type of players. And they would provide localized translation. Localized meaning that adapted to the circumstance of the country that will be using the product and reading the translation, right? And they were one of the first who started using machine translation. So of course, translators, not all translators appreciated it, but it definitely made translation faster because basically what you're doing right now, you are post editing. You're kind of working on the outcome of the translation and just fixing it to make it clean. So, and I think it's one of the nice ways how artificial intelligence can be used, where engineer becomes kind of like not necessarily a tester, but some kind of sorts who can look at the code and see the problems and fix them. And it feels like more effective way to code than like writing it from scratch. Then on the other hand, I understand that for many engineers, the experience of writing something, especially on the front end, when you get immediate result, it gives a lot of job satisfaction because you basically created something from nothing. And it's a nice feeling phenomenologically, subjectively. But when you take out this, there is some loss of this experience. So, I'm also worried about whether there will be enough interesting tasks for engineers in the future, especially engineers who would used to write a lot of code and still write.
I'm not so worried because the most rewarding part of engineering is not in writing code. You can rewrite the code that is not elegantly done. You can have nice solutions, and you will still have that as a part of your job. When you validate the code that the machine has written for you, but the machine code doesn't appear out of nothing. Prompt engineering nowadays is a very important skill where you have to have input commands for the machine to write you the output you want. And I think that is the most creative part. And then when you integrate this code into a solution, when you run and merge it into the whole software solution and see how it functions, then you get your reward and satisfaction because that's the end product. And it's you who is an engineer who triggered it. It's not the machine who triggers this. There is a lot of creativity still, and creative things. I don't think this will be replaced. And I think we don't need to be pessimistic that, oh, many people will lose their jobs. No, many people will produce more in a shorter period of time. So we will be able maybe to refactor old products in a way that was not possible before. We would create new products at the speed that was not available before, and so on and so forth.
Hmm. Yeah, I hear your optimism, and I think that's one of those situations, a half glass of water full or not full, situations. And it's interesting for you, me hearing you saying that the most important aspect about engineer satisfaction is not necessarily what you produce, but the impact that you make on the product,
Mhm.
right? And you kind of hypothesizing or maybe stating, I don't know, that it's like the most important thing. And as long as you can see your input in the result, you will be satisfied. But I still feel that I cannot say that it's the most important, but I still that in the factorial analysis, it would carry a lot of weight, this aspect. And this aspect is the experience of creating something on your own will.
Mhm.
And I think it's very important. I cannot speak like directly from engineer's perspective, but I can speak as a writer. I mean, we wrote together like something as well. And for me, doing it myself without the help of AI, and when you produce a nice text that is coherent, that is smooth, that is informative, that is clean in the sense that there is less sentences to get the idea, you know,
Mhm.
produced, it does give satisfaction. And I also once worked with a company also on recruitment stuff where people who would used to write advanced code started protesting about using I don't remember what was the word, but basically pre-prepared forms of code. So like using a framework, it's like using like specific even segments of code. And they didn't like that because okay, so what are we doing? We're just like playing Lego or what, so there was like that defensiveness in that situation. And I'm not necessarily maybe worried that people will not have jobs, but speaking like experientially, it does feel that there's more and more loss of autonomous creativity. The same thing with texts as well. I'm starting to notice that not even text, maybe TV series, I'm starting to see the same pattern in how copies are written, in how series are done, in how films are created. Of course, there was always a certain dramaturgic pattern that you follow, and people who write screenplays or are directors in the film industry, they know this. But now it's even more visible. And someone who appreciates art, who appreciates creativity, I mean, it's yeah, there is some kind of pessimism for me as well that we're becoming more and more predictable by using AI in a way, because we're kind of reinforcing the same texts, the same patterns that some people created, but maybe this is not the standard that we would like to AI to reproduce. You know what I mean? So that's what makes me worried a little bit.
Uh, Definitely. And at the same time, we can look back in the history. For example, industrialization led to mass production of goods. We can look at very different goods. And yet, craftsmanship and handcrafts are more valued than mass
That's
produced
true.
products. So there
That's
is,
true.
but the amount of handcrafted products is much smaller in comparison with the rest. So I think maybe something similar will also happen now with the use of machine learning and generative AI tools, where there will be niche, and it's a choice. Same with the products now, handcrafted product. You can have a choice to choose this or that direction.
Mm. Yeah, and unfortunately, that's probably the case what you're describing. We will basically have I will speak for not about engineering maybe here, but just for exemplary purposes. We will have, let's say, TV series and cinema that is produced by AI or mostly produced by AI. It will be the cheapest form, and then more creative, let's say more original forms, they because there will be less demand for it, it will become much pricier,
Mhm.
and only the privileged people will be able to get interesting, thought-provoking art, whereas the other people will be absorbing the same thing basically, that which is I wouldn't say that it's wrong, I mean, it will save a lot of costs for companies, but there there will be less originality in this sense. And I think with code it as well, I think there will be a time when frameworks will be created by AI as well, and AI will decide which framework is the best, and people will start using it because that's the most AI friendly framework, and people will stop developing on their own new ways how to. It's like with languages, so if everyone uses English and don't appreciate native tongues, those tongues are dying out. So that's, I guess, my my pessimism.
I share your pessimism. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit worried also about the new generation that this the request, the need for originality and
Mm,
creativity will decrease,
mm.
and then what the young people see uh, will be radically different, and their ceiling, the ambition will be radically different than today. But at the same
Speaking,
time, my child chooses
yeah,
to watch movies from 70s and 80s for some,
okay.
and listen to music, old music. So I have hope in at least some kids um, actively choosing original work over more machine produced.
And that's probably a responsibility that parents have to take, because they will be those who will introduce those forms of art to to their children. And as long as we will preserve the Kubricks and the Lynches of cinema, or the Dalis and Picassos of art, I think people will appreciate it, and they will look for a way. Okay, how can I produce something like that? Of course, it's very tough to do that. Then in the future generations, less and less of that preservation will happen, and you will still end up with some kind of pop art or pop technology that everyone uses, and only the few will be those who listens to old school stuff. But yeah, maybe we will use AI to also help people know about these things. Maybe when you're asking for a recommend me a TV series, I hope there will be smart people who will put into the algorithm a rule, push forward maybe something more established, something from the corpus, so that people would not forget that they are like I love the Kubrick's film Space Odyssey. I'm not sure if you watched it. It's amazing how still modern it looks like, and it's very old. It's I mean, how many years? It's like
Half a
50 years
century,
old,
yeah.
something like that. I mean, and it's still sci-fi. It's still nice special effects, So,
I'm
yeah.
with you on this one. I really think that there are works of art that are centuries old, and they
Yes,
still are as new as yesterday produced.
that's true.
So I think the art, the true art, is not dying.
Mm,
And yes, but looking forward, I think it's difficult to say what's right and what's wrong,
mm,
what's beautiful and what's not beautiful, because this is such a subjective thing.
yes.
Um, Preserving culture is a difficult task. The
Mm,
same as at the workplace, understanding what work culture is and how it transforms when people are not a part of physical walls
mm.
is. uh, is a tough is tough to understand even.
Yes. Yes, future is unpredictable for sure. And I think there are things that we cannot predict, and maybe these are the positive outcomes of the AI revolution, but there are definitely negative things that we can predict. And the history sometimes repeats, maybe often, and the fact that people will lean to the most cheapest form of entertainment, I think that's a fact. And if people don't do anything about it to ensure opportunities for originality, original work will die out. So I think there is still things that we can predict. We just, I mean, policymakers, maybe nonprofits need to yeah, push those ideas to ensure them. So okay, by the way, because you mentioned kids, there was also another topic I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned a very interesting term last time we spoke. I think it was an IT mother, right?
Yes, it's
What,
yeah,
so
agile parenting.
agile parent, IT mother. So what is an agile parent, and what is an IT mother, and basically what it's like to raise a kid being someone from technology? Is there maybe something to learn from this? Maybe some interesting stories. I would love to hear that as well.
I don't think I'm fully like an IT mother. I'm more an
Okay.
academic mother, and
Okay.
one thing that comes with it is a lot of reading and a lot of books available for kids. I've been lucky to have a son who loves reading. I think it's in the genes again. You either have it or not. But my task as a mother is to feed this interest and passion for reading by providing the variety of different books that are with growing challenge for the small reader, and to ignite this interest.
Can you give me an example of a challenging read for your child? And by the way, how old
He's
are they?
9 years old now.
Okay.
Oh, this will be tough because we have books in several languages. But
Hmm.
sometimes I choose books for teenagers that are, or books by Nobel Prize winners in literature that
Hmm.
are philosophical stories uh, that are
Cr-
interesting.
Crime and Punishment.
So it's the same. It might be similar to fairy tales, but the
Hmm.
quality of the literature as such is radically different. So it's a lot of not only dialogues, because when you select
Yeah.
books for kids, you are sometimes willing for kids to have this simple language built on simple dialogues. But the beauty of the literature is when you have these long descriptions of the surrounding atmosphere, of the feelings, and so on and so forth. And I think
Hmm.
that uh, yes, maybe repeating this creativity in the family. I worked quite a lot when my son was small on
Hmm.
developing fantasy and imagination. So
Hmm.
sometimes we would drink imaginary coffee from imaginary cups,
Wow.
and not every kid is capable of playing this imaginary game. But this creates a lot of this creative thinking and selection of books, of course, from simple to more advanced literature also plays an important role.
And what about, let's say, s- some things like technology at home? What are the possibilities for the child to learn? What are the boundaries? Maybe, I guess, someone who works in the general sense, human factors of engineering, human computer interaction, anything maybe that parents should know and make sure that they enforce these or include in their parenting style. Anything from your experience, your understanding.
I think that we are focusing in the family on the opposite. I think with the
Mm,
mass use of technology and AI as well,
mm,
one of the missing links will be social interaction. So people who are good at social relationship building relationships will be with advantage over those who are only good with
mm.
technology. So my son doesn't have a phone. He's 9 years old, and this is not his choice. It's our family choice because we believe that the browsing and this short attention span produced by the use of technology is um, a worrying factor that a child chooses tools over human interaction.
Yes.
So I think we worked quite a lot of trying to explain also the reasons why this is important, why we chose not to have a phone. But at the same time, he has a laptop, he has a computer, and he has access to different tools that he can learn with. So he's using maps to study geography. He's
Yeah.
much better in flags in countries, in capitals than I am, due to the age that I forget stuff that I learned at school, but also because he is spending his time with technology to learn stuff.
Maybe you will be surprised or not, but if your kid is spending some time on YouTube, there's a big community of geolocation
Hmm.
where you kind of have to guess from an image where the what the country is, where the location is, and there's like the art of it where people are just doing very kind of deductive guessing
Hmm.
based on what they see, and they compete on time, how much points you can earn in a short period of time, how much objects you can guess or countries or whatever. I mean, I'm not into this. I'm probably, you know butchering how this exactly works, so sorry for those who are fans of it, but there's definitely a lot of interesting ways how you can learn about geography right now. So, do you allow your child to play computer games on their will whenever they want, or is it restrained a
It's
bit?
restricted time.
Okay,
We allow very limited time. It's less than 1 hour, 45 minutes, when other
okay,
kids come to play together. Otherwise, it's only on Saturdays, 1 hour when he gets to play whatever he wants alone.
and are you thinking at some age allowing more hours, allowing your kid to have a phone, or you are not overthinking right now
We
about it?
have increased the time already. We also use it as an award for physical activity.
Hmm.
So if he does some sports or he goes on a long walk with us, fast we have also an competition. If he completes the let's say 3 kilometer round in a certain time faster than before, and then he gets some time extra to watch
Interesting.
or to
Hmm.
play. So yes, we try to balance the physical activity with this active sitting on your
Yeah.
bottom in front of the gadgets.
And what do you think is the appropriate age for? Because I have my own ideas also based on research, but I'm curious to learn what you think about the appropriate age for a child to have a phone, especially nowadays when TikTok is like the main app that kids uses. Also for creativity, not only for just zombie scrolling.
I don't know. The true answer is
Mm,
that I don't know. I thought it would be 9 years old, but when the birthday approached, I understood that it's not the time. I'm more afraid of the consequences than on being unpopular mother. So we have had a conversation, and the compromise was to have a laptop instead of a phone.
Mm.
And to be honest, I don't know what to do for the next birthday. 10 years.
Mm.
I see that luckily not all of his classmates have also a phone, but it's a challenge. And I see that a lot of parents choose harmony over what they truly believe is good for the child.
I remember I already told the story on the podcast, but I will tell you this as well. I was going on a public transport and I noticed a mother with a newborn kid. The kid was still in the wheelchair, not wheelchair. What's the word?
Trolley.
Trolley, sorry, not wheelchair, trolley. And it was not older than 1 year old. I mean, it was still a newborn, but the kid was already able to manipulate objects, carry them, or do something with them. And I noticed that the when the kid started crying or something like that, the mother gave the kid a toy phone, which looks like an iPhone,
Mhm.
but it's not like a real phone. And I felt, wow, this is crazy. So the kid is already accustomed to the idea of having a phone, like not even 1 year old. So that was crazy.
Yes, I mean, you would be surprised in toy stores what toys you can buy.
Probably I would. I shouldn't go there, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So maybe for the end, one last question, and that's maybe the gossipy part of me asking this. I know that you still worked and worked a lot with Spotify.
Mhm.
Have you ever met their founder, Daniel Ek?
No, I haven't.
Oh,
But I have been in a delegation that knocked at his door, but he wasn't there.
oh, that's unfortunate. So, any myths about him from working with people who maybe knew him or know him still? Any like second opinions? I'm sure that, of course, it's a difficult question for you to answer because that's one of your research partners. But still, anything interesting? We need to learn about Daniel Ek or Spotify in general.
I will not be the right person to ask, but I
I
watched the
see.
video, the Netflix series
TV series, yeah.
Spotify, and I've talked to people who knew the people in this yes series, and some say that it's very close to reality.
Interesting.
And of course, some say that it's the whole setup is a little bit theatrical more than
Mm-hmm.
realistic. But it's a nicely done piece of work. So those of you who are interested in Spotify from a popular gossip category should look at Netflix series. It's quite
Mm,
entertaining. And those of
interesting.
you who are interested about to learn about how Spotify works, they have a very good podcast on Spotify,
Mm.
a product story, which tells
Oh, it's about engineering, right?
yes, it's about how the company started, how they had
Mm.
servers in an apartment, how they delivered the new versions of Spotify
Mm.
tools to the public, and it's quite interesting as well.
And if you shared briefly, because Spotify is definitely a leader of some sorts in the engineering world. There was always their team structure that they dumped, but others kept using. So that's something that circles around. So anything that you personally or professionally learned, like briefly, the most important thing that touched you about this company, what would you what would you share or indicate about Spotify, their organizational culture, work culture, people, anything you would like to specify?
I think it's a very interesting example of the silver bullet. Uh,
Okay.
there is a research article about there is no silver bullet, uh,
Mm-hmm.
a story that a company becomes successful, and then someone wants to learn from this success, so they start
Mm-hmm.
to copying the structures,
Mm.
work structures, or the
Mm.
processes, and they fail because they don't
Yes.
fit in every context and situation and organization. And they say, oh, this is a really bad model or a framework or whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
they try and adjust these models to their needs and become successful. Oh, this is great. And they publish yet another new model. And there is a company standing in the queue to learn from others, trying to adopt this model and fails and reinvents the model again. So I think one of the biggest revelations for those who are not aware how Spotify actually works is that Spotify model has nothing to do with how Spotify works. And this is a company that reinvents themselves. They're not a startup anymore. They're a really large company, and
Yes.
they have similar problems and challenges as big companies nowadays, and they keep improving their ways of working and learning from their yesterday's experience, what to do tomorrow.
Mm. I see. Okay, interesting. And a final question would be, that's a question I usually finish every conversation, is when you reflect back on our conversation we had, we talked about the importance of reflection in the beginning, so we'll finish with reflection. So anything that maybe was important for you today that you're either taking or you feel needs to be emphasized again, what would you say to the audience?
I think that curiosity is the source of the drive for improvement. And I think as a
Mm,
researcher, I can only suggest trying to be open minded and not jump to conclusions. And we've talked a lot about the stories that apply and situations where one fits all solution doesn't apply to all the different cases. And I think that's one of the things that I would like to reflect upon and say that it's
mm,
important um, to reflect, to diagnose the situation, and really try to understand the ups and downs, because every single recommendation that one can give has drawbacks and advantages.
that's true. That's true. Okay, Daria. So thank you for being here. It was super interesting. I think we share a lot in common, and that curiosity, research curiosity, included as well. So I hope to see you sometime in the future again. Maybe some new research findings will be on your table. So would love to discuss them with you and the audience.
Thank you for the invitation and the interesting conversation, Povilas.